Sunday, we talked about how the leaders of the confessing church didn't really understand the moment that they were in when it was happening. They misunderstood what the Nazis were after. And they made decisions based more on preserving their self-interest rather than preserving humanity. And many of those who survived lived with deep regret for not doing more when they had the chance. And it's hard to know, truly, when you're in that moment, but there is a sort of palpable sense often. And I've come to call these situations the times when we're called to do more as character-defining moments. They are moments that test not only our mettle, but also our understanding of who we are as moral beings. Now, there are very few truly immoral or amoral beings, people. Humans live with a moral compass that we believe guides our actions, our behaviors, our friend groups and our associations, our political associations, our concepts of patriotism, and even our understanding of God. And regardless of where we sit on the political spectrum, we typically hold our political views because of how we understand the world from a moral perspective. But it's not that people who disagree with us are immoral in the sense that, we might call them immoral, but they might call us immoral. We're both operating from a sense of understanding the world from a moral vision. And if you ask people, most would say that they are very convicted in their moral views. This is who they are. But in reality, most people have a strong tendency to overlook and protect people close to them who commit immoral acts. So when we look back on the rise of the Nazis, it's not uncommon to hear people think or believe, like, I would have been part of the resistance. And maybe you would have. But statistically, it is much more likely that not only would you have not joined the resistance, but you either would have been silent or possibly even supported them, even if you disagreed. And I don't mean that as a personal affront. I too am convicted by the numbers. The numbers just tell us that when character-defining moments like those happen, most people either abandon their moral compass or adjust it in a way so as to make not confronting the situation justifiable. And this seems to be a perennial question for humans, right? Why, in the face of what we believe is immoral, do we fail to hold perpetrators accountable? I was living in Boston when the Catholic clergy abuse scandal broke, and one of the questions that came up over and over again was, why did it take so long for these horrors to come to light? People knew. So why? And regardless of where you are in the political spectrum, we all agree that sexually abusing children is wrong in the abstract, at least it's absolutely immoral. And, I remember reading an article of this one particular parish that held a vote of confidence in their priest despite having charges leveled against him. And the result was nearly unanimous. And the article actually stood out to me not because of the vote, but because there was a member of that congregation who happened to be a police officer who had worked with abused children. And he stood up in the middle of the congregation and he started berating them, calling them out for their moral failure. But ultimately, what happened is he no longer felt welcome at that church and he left. And it's easy to judge from a distance. Truly. It's easy to judge from a distance. Right? It perhaps shouldn't surprise us. If anything, we know that it is more uncommon than common for people like Harvey Weinstein or Bill Cosby or Larry Nassar to be held accountable, right? What these men were doing was known, if not by the general public, by people close to them. And those people who were close to them refused to act. And it seems that it is our familiarity with perpetrators that keeps us from following our moral compass. In 2019, a paper was published in the Personality and Social Psychology Bulletin called Punish or Protect: How Close Relationships Shape Responses to Moral Violations. And it explored why people have, on the one hand, a fundamental tendency to condemn and punish acts that cause harm to others as highly immoral, yet on the other hand, have a fundamental tendency to look out for the welfare of close others when they engage in immoral acts. Now, close others is the term that the authors chose to represent people that we are familiar with. So it includes family, it includes friends, work associates, clergy, etc. They weren't studying why we're so adamant about holding strangers accountable for moral violations, but rather why we don't maintain these moral boundaries when it comes to people who are close to us. The authors found three compelling reasons: self-interest, loyalty, and harm. Now, speaking specifically, people had more self-interest to protect the perpetrator when this individual was close compared to distant, and in contrast, more self-interest to punish the perpetrator when this individual was a distant other compared to a close other. People viewed it as more disloyal to the perpetrator if the individual was a close other compared to a distant other, and they viewed it as more disloyal to others in society to protect a perpetrator if this person was not familiar to them. And finally, they believed that it would harm the perpetrator if there was a decision to punish them compared to a distant other. And they reported that it would harm others in society more if the perpetrator was unknown. Right? Now, this isn't really hard to understand. We look at the news and we see people who do illegal things, and we believe that they should be punished. Right? But when it comes to family, very close work associates, members of a church community, we often encounter a concern over preserving the relationship. And it's this closeness of our relationship that actually shapes our moral judgments. One of the examples that was given in the paper is if a brother commits burglary, this act is perceived as less immoral than if it were committed by the mailman. And as a result, protecting one's brother seems justifiable when turning one's brother into law enforcement is seen as an overreaction. And additionally, people engage in a more lenient form of punishment that is aimed at making oneself feel morally justified when preserving the relationship. Now, there's something intuitively true about this study. It's good to have research that backs it up, but we've also all had life experiences that have taught us this same lesson over the years. Some of us have particular family situations that have allowed one member of that family to take advantage of that dynamic constantly. Not everyone, but the ones who know, right? And we've also seen it with local business people or politicians who have their sins minimized or washed away because they're such good people. Like, if you knew them, they're good people, right? And this notion, however, gets expanded sometimes in ways that we don't expect. Right? The Sentencing Project found that black men are nearly 6 times as likely as white men to be incarcerated. And a report by the U.S. Sentencing Commission found that black men receive sentences that are 19% longer than white men for the same federal crimes. And one of the insidious dimensions of white supremacist thinking is that all white people are somehow family to white people. while black people are somehow other. And one of the issues with holding a firm moral line is that there are people who are close to us, people who we know that love their children and they love their dogs, and we've seen them be kind and helpful, but nevertheless engage in behaviors that are not good for society. And the complexity of the relationship keeps us from doing what in a more antiseptic space we would believe to be right. Why did people not stand up to the Nazis when the moment came? Well, first of all, it wasn't just a moment that arrived, right? It was many moments that built up. But the truth is they probably knew some of them. And they probably didn't know socialists or Jews, or not in the same way, right? Not in a close way, which allowed them to become other. But we can see this also even in our own denomination, right? One of the reasons that very small churches, let's say churches under 50, for example, will always be stuck there, they'll never grow, is because one or more fairly toxic people are allowed to have a very large say in how a congregation is run. And visitors come to that church, and it's pretty easy to discern, it's quick to discern that bad behavior is tolerated, and they don't stay. At my very first church, we had a woman with a reputation of being nasty to everyone. And in my second week there, the vice president told me a story about how she threw butter on another woman, laughing uncomfortably as she looked at the ground. What was happening in that moment is the vice president was facing this profound moral conflict and probably seeking some sort of pastoral absolution in telling me this. Because the right answer would have been to show the butter chucker the door. We don't throw butter on people here. We don't, right? But she wasn't shown the door because she was family. In larger churches, this dynamic is often mitigated because people who behave in toxic ways are not allowed, typically, into positions of power because there's more people to choose from, but not always. Churches are particularly susceptible to this dynamic because we are pastoral organizations, and we say things like, all are welcome, which is not true. It's not, and it should never be true. It's actually a terrible line. Right? We say it almost in a version of marketing. You'll see it in front of churches elsewhere, right? Like, all are welcome. And on one level, I know what they're trying to say. But when I say that, I often get pushback because there is a high value in wanting to create close others, which is good. I actually am in favor of that. But churches not only get understood as places of spiritual formation, right? But it's where you get to be close with people. You learn to expand your sense of like what is possible in this world. But people should not be allowed to behave in immoral ways or just, bad ways. Because that leaves the victims of that behavior isolated and vulnerable. That's what happens in the family, if you know that family dynamic. Why are churches segregated? Why are churches segregated?
Family and other.
What's that?
Family and other.
Family and other. Family and other. In the dynamic of where a congregation is mostly white, people of color visit, they experience behaviors that indicate what it means to belong, and they are often excluded from that meaning. Or they experience racism, and instead of holding the person who perpetrated the racism accountable, it's minimized. Because, the perpetrator is family. And, don't worry about it, they're so dumb, that's not who we are. From a distance, we can call it out and say, yeah, that's who they are, right? But whenever we hear somebody at a Republican rally be like, I'm not a racist. We're like, we're pretty quick, right? Yes, yes, you are. Because a lot of us don't identify as a close other with the Republican Party. But make it a family member, and it becomes more difficult. We are social animals. This is not a problem. We're social animals, and we seek out socialization. And I actually believe we need others to become the people that we are supposed to become, right? For me, God is not a thing in the sky. God is a mutuality. It is this life force that is bonding us and building us and growing within us and growing us together. So my mind became a little more alive when I first heard that Martin Buber line, that famous phrase, the concentration and fusion into a whole being can never be accomplished by me and can never be accomplished without me. I require a you to become. Becoming I say you. All actual life is encounter, which is a poetic way of saying, like, I need you and you need me for us to become whole beings. It's a spiritual journey of belonging to one another. So socialization is not a problem, but family is not a problem in itself. It's a fundamental truth, in my opinion, which explains why it's so hard to hold people accountable for bad or immoral behavior. When these people are close to us, when they have become part of our cosmos, when they've become part of our becoming as a whole being, holding them accountable or even letting them go threatens the wholeness of our being. Something of who I am will be lost if I put up a boundary, if I hold this line, if I say this is not acceptable, because it might mean that this person no longer has a space in my life. And we might be okay with letting a relationship go with the ones that, if we've been victimized, right? But it's harder when someone else has been victimized, and we must take that loss on for ourselves to be consistent with our moral vision. Glenn has been victimized by Mark, which doesn't happen. I'm just using you guys as examples. Doesn't happen. But it's harder for me to hold the line because I don't want to lose Mark. And so exactly, that's good. But what happens is I let the harm that happened to Glenn occur. The conclusion of the article was, in my opinion, kind of weak, because there isn't really a solution. Like, they had to sort of come with a solution, but, the solution, we all know what the solution is, right? It was not revolutionary. It's establish objective moral standards that should take precedence over relational ones, and to introduce what seems like a meditative practice of self-distancing when evaluating serious transgressions. I don't disagree with this. Like, these are good suggestions. They're hardly new ones. This is the whole concept of the justice system. There is a moral standard, right, by which everyone is evaluated, and then there's a judge who's trained to be impartial and guided by self-distancing. And yet the numbers tell us that this doesn't always work. In fact, they tell us that it doesn't work. Not really. Is it better than when we were judged by a clan leader? Yes, it is. The son of the clan leader always got away with it. So it's better. It's better than it was, but obviously it's a constant reminder that as social beings, this is what we do. There's something intrinsic to how we make meaning because we understand the cosmos through the relationships we have. The Nazis did not become the Nazis overnight, just like we did not end up with this Supreme Court overnight. Not overnight we didn't. No. This has been coming for a long time. Right? And we probably have our own unique understanding of how we got to this moment in history. And you might say that it's Roe v. Wade that sort of triggered the response, or maybe it was the burning of Atlanta in the Civil War, or maybe it was just the arrival of Columbus. And you're like, this is when it happened. For me, when I think about it, because it's arbitrary where you put the point on the paper, but I always think about it as Brown versus Board of Education. Right? Public schools are a great opportunity to help all Americans to understand themselves as family. But the people who did not want us to understand ourselves as family have systematically attacked that system, have attacked teachers, have attacked the premise of a unified story that included all of us. And we are now reaping a whirlwind of something of these, 70 years of assault. The idea that you went to see Uncle Tom's Cabin and you had a conversation about what it was like to in the drum line, who's going to hold their part, expanded the world of the close other. And that has been attacked. We sing songs that say the whole world is our family. But in reality, we don't actually believe that. We might want to believe that, but we don't it yet. Not yet. And perhaps the best thing that we can do to further that vision is to engage ourselves introspectively, asking, who is the close other to me? And conversely, who is not? For a month, we've been circling around this idea of who we are becoming, because we are always becoming something. But are we conscious of who we are becoming? Right? This church is a microcosm of the world. And what we want to see out there, first we have to see it here. If we want a healthier world, we must investigate what defines our understanding of who is part of the family and expanding it, and prioritizing creating safe spaces. And this means even if we aren't the ones who are victimized, we must be willing to risk the relationship to ensure their safety. Sometimes people interpret this as meaning that everyone gets to define what's safe, and that's not true. Right? The woman who threw butter at my first congregation, when people finally decided to hold her accountable, she protested that the other members of the congregation were making it unsafe for her. Seriously, that's just manipulation. And manipulative people exist everywhere. That's not, it's not unique to UUs. But they're everywhere. But expanding the concept of who is in the family does not mean that all are welcome. That's actually the sure way to end up with a toxic system. Right? Objective standards are a chimera that have died with modernism. Right? We still cling to that idea, hoping that somewhere there will be a standard that we can just hold ourselves to. But we know now to understand that there are no real objective standards. But this doesn't mean that we can't seek to collectively define healthy ways of being together. We should do that. We won't succeed 100% of the time. But we can call ourselves back, holding on to the idea that we are becoming something. We are always becoming something. Who do we want to become?